Hello to anyone listening and welcome to The Patriotic Communist. This is Max Rice, and this is the podcast where I advocate for a socialist revolution in the United States of America, and where I analyze current events from a far-left perspective. We are in the historical context where we choose socialism or barbarism, and that has never been more true. So hey everyone, I am sorry that I did not release an episode last week, but I am back. And holy shit, there is a lot to talk about. So the entire country, and even the majority of the world, experienced protests in pretty much every major city, and many of them are still experiencing protest activity after the cold-blooded murder of George Floyd by a Minneapolis police officer. It has nearly become a unanimous opinion that police are out of control in the United States. These protests are in the name of the racially charged violence of our police force. In response to these massive protests about police violence, the police responded by openly terrorizing the United States population. I'm not exaggerating. We must call it what it is. This is state terrorism. The police in this nation are purposely committing horrendous violence in order to use terror to force the American public back in line. They're using tear gas on proven peaceful protests in too many places to count, even though tear gas is a war crime, according to the Geneva Convention, and tear gas is an extremely non-accurate, mass panic-provoking, and even potentially deadly weapon. Police are also shooting rubber bullets at way too many people's heads to count, including grandmothers that were very obviously not a threat to them, and a rubber bullet that is aimed at the head is considered lethal force. Just for the record. Police are also driving into crowds of people on purpose with their cars. And again, this is not one incident. There are multiple cases of these horrible crimes I'm talking about. They have also been old-fashioned, just beating the shit out of people by throwing them on the ground, hitting them with sticks, literally just walking up to random people standing around peacefully and pushing them as hard as they can, catching them off guard, resulting in massive injury in several cases. At least several cases that I saw. Many innocent women have been targeted and violently attacked by police for no reason other than peaceful acts such as videotaping a protest, which is a legal, peaceful act. Police are also even openly targeting journalists who, keep in mind, are clearly identifiable since they have a giant fucking camera with them. And when I say police are targeting journalists, I mean they're pointing their pepper bullets and rubber bullets directly at them, directly at journalists who are simply doing their job and videotaping in a public area that our tax dollars pay for. This is insanity. This is terrorism. In fact, this is fascism. This is a fascist state right now. And I'll really quickly explain my case for why I would call this a fascist state at this point. So first of all, the very violently oppressive behavior against the press. We have a government controlled by corporations. We have a military that is controlled by corporations and to a large extent through entities such as Northrop Grumman, Raytheon, Boeing, BlackRock, Blackwater, etc. We have an incredibly oppressive and violent police force that will commit violence in the interests of corporate profits. We have a massive surveillance state where we are spied on without any warrants by our government. We have intelligence agencies that act largely with impunity and constantly violate our human rights and laws, which we have seen time after time, and they're openly indicting the journalist Julian Assange for doing journalism right now. There's no decency or rule of law. We are controlled with violence and propaganda, and our entire way of life is controlled by corporations and government thugs. This is a fascist system. Anyways, the National Guard was called into many states and cities, including my own city of San Diego. There are a lot of soldiers, or there was recently a lot of soldiers. I don't know if they're still here. Sorry about that lack of information. But there are a lot of soldiers, when I wrote this, with M16s walking around. The purpose of this is very clear. and it is to serve the government's interests using the threat of tremendous militant violent force. They send people with weapons of warfare into the city in order to protect private property in many cases. And again, they're doing this with the threat of militant, lethal force. They do this instead of answering to the root of the causes of the grievances. Is there any better illustration of what us socialists are talking about when we say that our system uses state-sanctioned violence and terrorism in order to protect private property and capitalist interests? Because this is an example of this capitalist practice that is as clear as day and right in front of our faces. I mean, when there are soldiers wearing camo and holding M16s in front of oligarchs' private property to protect it, what else would you call that? The reason they do this is because our entire government is corrupted by the owning class, the oligarchs, the forces of corporate America. So of course it is a priority for the police and the National Guard to protect private property rather than a priority to keep people safe and protect their constitutional rights individually. It is because corporations do not care about your constitutional rights. They care about their individual profit interests. Now, to break that down to more simple terms, the police are agents of the government that are put in place with a domestic monopoly on violence that they get to use in order to enforce the law. This is what the police are in theory. They are there to enforce the law, and also pretty much in practice. Now, who are the people that control the legislation in this country? And what the legislation is the laws, which is what the police are there to enforce. Well, federally, that would be Congress, which includes the House of Representatives and the Senate. These entities also exist on the state level and in some form on the local level as well. Now, all of these major legislative forces are corrupted by large corporate interests. A majority of the legislators in this country depend on donations from large corporations in order to have the resources needed for their re-election. And this goes from local to federal elections. This is the way they get to keep their job. And it is the way that they are told the system works, implying it is the only way you have a chance to even have a career in politics. What this does systematically is undermine democracy. We do not live in democracy. We live in a neo-fascist state instead. Our oppression is structural, and that is why we don't see it as easily. Democracy is supposed to function in a way that keeps the people in power accountable to the people through the power of their vote, which essentially is supposed to translate the legislators' power into people. The politicians are supposed to depend on doing a good job and keeping the people happy in order to keep their job, because votes is how they keep their job. Instead, since we're in the context of a capitalist economic system, politicians are catering to corporations in order to get reelected rather than catering to regular people, and this causes the legislation and decisions made by the people in power to reflect corporate interests rather than the people's interests. So this is why the police use tear gas and quote-unquote less than lethal rounds on looters. Even though looting is, last time I checked, not a death penalty offense. This is why Donald Trump says horrible things about murdering looters. And I guess it's time to start talking about looting. Now, I just want to be crystal clear. There's no moral problem at all with burning down a Chase bank as long as no one gets hurt. There is nothing immoral about stealing from a Walmart or looting a Walmart or burning down a Walmart as long as no one gets hurt. These are the corporations that suck the wealth out of poor communities through massive levels of exploitation. That's how capitalism works. The more desperate you are, the more extremely they're going to exploit you. With that being said, what I do question is the effectiveness of all of this chaos. I understand the symbolic significance of these events. I would say it's even more significant that police departments have been burned down. And these are extremely strong messages to the people that hold power. But in order to stop the chaos, the police around the country replied to these strong messages with extreme violence. And it worked. Many protest movements around the country are no longer an intimidating force. And it makes sense. Nothing demotivates somebody's activism more than being traumatically hurt or even just witnessing the violence. It can be traumatic. And what this tells us, I believe, is that organization is key. Having key demands that are tangible and measurable, and having a massive movement that will not rest until those demands are met, that is how change is made. We must make economic demands for the black communities and for all impoverished communities in this country. Poverty is class violence, and it is at the root of all of this. Police have arrest quotas, so in order to do well in their job, they need to arrest people and hand out tickets, and this means they are incentivized to enforce the law even when it is not being broken. With the way our system works, cops can't get away with this in wealthy neighborhoods, since rich people can pay for lawyers and defend themselves in court, while poor people literally can't afford to defend themselves. There is also cultural, racial roots to these problems that are absolutely important to discuss and solve as well. But as long as our economic system and the police system incentivizes discrimination, then it is going to happen, and there will be a toxic culture around it. But keep in mind, the police answer to and take orders from the government, whether it is the city, county, state, or federal, and the government is corrupt to its core and has no interest in changing the system that it benefits from. The violence police inflict on the poor and on protesters is a good thing for the powerful. They often approve of it and only make symbolic changes and lots of virtue signaling. Some basic economic demands that I think should be made in protests such as this include an end to the bail system, an end to the drug war, an end to the arrest quotas, and replace the arrest quota incentives with some sort of community review system so that the community has the power over the career of the people that are supposed to serve and protect them. Oh, and reparations. On that note, it's pretty disgusting that there still has been no reparations paid to the black community of the United States. Germany paid reparations for the Holocaust forever ago, and still reparations are not even in mainstream political discussion. There are also demands such as Medicare for all and UBI, which would both disproportionately benefit the black community. These are tangible demands. There are a lot to be made. There are a lot of wrongs that at least need to start to be made right for our future generations. But we won't do that without actually organizing and leveraging that power. And also, for the record, in my opinion, the ultimate solution to this is an overthrow of capitalism. I mean, that is the point of the show. That is what I am alluding to as the ultimate answer, as there may be tangible, good economic demands you could make that could make real change in people's lives within this capitalist system, and I would support those. And I think that would be a much more effective protest movement. I think a protest movement centered around a socialist revolution is where the energy would best be spent at the moment. And just to be clear, I'm completely against the destruction of any small businesses or the destruction of any building that people live in. And obviously, I am against any violence that is not in self-defense of yourself or a loved one, or hell, even simply an innocent one. But violence in the name of defense of property is fucked up, and we should acknowledge that. I also want to make it clear, although it appears that state terrorism has succeeded in subduing the nation's unrest, this is a momentary situation. Do not get discouraged about change coming. If you don't come away with anything else from this episode, I want you to come away with this. Change is coming whether you like it or not, frankly. And most of it's negative at the moment. We are in a depression. All the money is going to become more concentrated in the 1% than ever before. There's still a variety of dramatic ecological disasters on their way due to climate change, and we are in the midst of a pandemic. Change is very inevitable at this point, and there will be more unrest. We need to all educate as many people as we can. Things are getting exponential. We are an empire in rapid decline. In further news, the pandemic is ramping up. Experts are now on the news saying we never passed the first wave of the pandemic. And this is what I said when they decided to criminally start up the economy again. This is also what the experts were saying at the time as well. Oh, and a housing crisis is right around the corner, with almost half of our country being very desperate for money right now, which is another thing that I said was going to happen because it was obviously going to happen. So change is coming, and we need to save this country before it's too late, because right now we are seeing the United States become a failed neo-fascist state. We are an empire in rapid decline, and it may turn real ugly real fast. We're in those exponential phases. Anyways, thanks for listening, stay vigilant, and stay safe.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of The Patriotic Communist. All of the music you heard in this podcast was produced and performed by me, Max Rice, and if you would like to check it out, just search Max Rice on any streaming platform. That's M-A-X-R-I-C-E. Yes, like the food rice. This is Max Rice signing off.
We're all distracted by media. The misdirection of attention benefits big powers I mentioned. Y'all try to lessen questions and attentions. Money equals power. We gotta kill this connection. These force-fed concepts make no sense. How y'all hating immigrants and we controlled by the 1%. Zombified by screens. Dehumanization comes easily. All I hear are American supremacists, but this line of thought is a normality, full of fallacies. While we stay combative oversee laws and more laws. As far as I can see, and no one cares because of the mass distractions. We're expected to not question how the government uses our taxes, unless it's helping people. That they ramble like that's all to see. Though we need to free the people, we need a fucking hero. We need some MLK, FDR style of change. We're full of pain and ignorant, but won't live in fear. Though we need some yellow vest, bulletproof vests and bold claims. We need that fire in our hearts that can't be tamed. We need to reject and correct our collective violent actions, but it won't happen. Fuck, we're all distracted.